The Forbidden Tale, a comprehensive study on lesbian, gay, bisexuals, LGB in Iran. Chapter 5: Changing Global Paradigms and Way Forward. Contents: Changing Global Paradigms and Way Forward. The Changing Paradigms of LGB. What's going on in Islamic countries? A look to the future. Conclusion. Changing Global Paradigms and Way Forward. The wheels of change come painfully and slowly. A quick backward glance of history bears this out. Witness the number of years it took for the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, DSM, to declassify homosexuality from its origin stance that homosexuality is a mental illness disease. The years it took to a Supreme Court to recognize the inherent zones of privacy in one's sexuality. See Lawrence case discussion in Chapter 4. And the legal declaration by the highest court in the US legal hierarchy already held in numerous European court decisions that two people of the same sex have the right to be married. This court's decision was the apogee of LGBT rights. After decades of backsliding, there is a growing public stance of homosexuality. The international community has been clear and cognate in its stance that human rights and legal protection is applicable to everyone, including the LGBT community. This has been exemplified in court decisions, supportive governments, numerous activisms, changing laws and regulations, the demand for better treatment and legal recognition for its vulnerable minority, and the erosion of the unacceptance to the acceptance that has been the earmark for the LGBT community. However, this vigorous defense and recognition of LGBT lives remains fragile in the Middle East, including Iran. This research study is one of the most comprehensive studies of its genre about LGBT lives, not only in a broader worldwide context, but also about LGBT lives in Iran that struggle to thrive in the throes of a glaring lack of legal remedies and lack of societal protection. It is based on a survey of 500 respondents from 3 major cities. This research study reveals to the readers that whilst homosexuality has gained greater social acceptance in many Western societies, it remains highly stigmatized, in most cases forbidden and potentially lethal in Islamic countries. This chapter pieces together major problems encountered by LGBT people worldwide, the emerging and changing paradigms of LGBT around the globe, and the paradigms and scale of change needed in order to progress in the Islamic world. The Changing Paradigms of LGB. Previously, LGB individuals people were forced to live cloistered lives in duplicitous existence in the shadows, lie to friends and families, and hide an important aspect of them. They often faced tremendous difficulties growing up in a society where heterosexuality was presented as the only acceptable sexual orientation, and homosexuality was regarded as deviant. Many LGBT people, whilst masking their sexuality so that they would not face the overwhelming hate from society, would still congregate in safe venues where others would not discriminate against them. As previously mentioned, one such venue was a bar in New York named Stonewall, which catered the gay community. See Chapter 1, Historical Narrative of LGBT, for an analysis of Stonewall. Although interest groups for gay persons had previously existed, the raid on Stonewall began the true movement for homosexual equality in America. The legacy of Stonewall drew attention to the issue of discrimination against gay community, and homosexuals began to stop masking their orientation. LGBT has become a widely accepted acronym to describe sexual and gender orientation for minorities. Currently, in many Western countries, LGBT people do live openly in heterosexual-dominated communities, unafraid and unhesitant to reveal their true sexual nature. Western society has become much more accepting of homosexuality due to increased cultural exposure via media and daily lives, popular culture and collective movements, debates, and the generational shift of opinion that has accompanied a new population that has grown up with the concept of a LGBT culture embedded in their lives. The US government has responded to the public's shifting views and has slowly removed restrictions on discriminatory laws against the LGBT community, a group of people simply hated for having different sexual preferences. Nevertheless, despite these encouraging realities, the homosexual community has struggled for a long time in seeking the understanding of those around them. The driving factor underlying the expansion and progressive growth of support for same-sex rights has been the exposure of the LGBT community. Whether through the media or personal connections, Americans are finding that homosexuality is much more widespread than what had been previously thought, resulting in more acceptance of the LGBT culture. As per the findings of the PEW research, 49% said homosexuality should be accepted by society and 41% said it should be rejected. When some states' courts declining that same-sex marriage bans are legal and others declaring the bans illegal, the Supreme Court was expected to make a national ruling whether or not same-sex marriage bans are legal. The US Supreme Court's pronunciation on the bans on same-sex marriage from 5 states, Utah, Oklahoma, Virginia, Indiana, and Wisconsin, was an apogee US Supreme Court decision. Appellate and district courts in other states have also followed suit with legal decisions that reflect the holding of the US Supreme Court. Based on recent Supreme Court decisions regarding same-sex equality and the immense Western and European shift of acceptance that has cascaded, it is not surprising that the 2015 United Supreme Court decision that marriage to same-sex marriages is offensive against the Constitution. There are now 37 states, including the District of Columbia, that has legalized gay marriage and 21 other countries where same-sex marriage is legal. In 2015, the Mexican Supreme Court issued a ruling making it much easier for gay and lesbian couples to wed. Although the court did not technically legalize same-sex unions nationwide, it was a major step in that direction. Since 2011, the southern Mexican state of Quintana Roo also has allowed gay marriages. In 2014, the Congress of the northern state of Coahuila approved same-sex marriage, and in 2015, neighboring Chihuahua followed suit. After years of political jockeying and furious public debate, Australia's parliament voted legalize same-sex marriage. In response to the LGBT social movement, some countries, Brazil amongst them, began to consider the specific needs of this group. Homophobia has been responsible for the killing of 2,403 gays, lesbians, and transvestites in Brazil within the last 2 decades. At the end of 2003, the government launched health policies programs such as the Brazil Without Homophobia program, and in 2010, the preliminary version of the National Comprehensive LGBT Health Plan. This was a historic moment for the advancement of homosexuals' human rights. Despite the fact that advances were identified, one still observes the difficulties faced by LGBT people in accessing the health system as a result of prejudicial and discriminatory behavior that is often adopted by health professionals. In contrast, Japan's combination of evolving social attitudes and competition for talent has forced the business world to adapt. Yet, the reality for gay Japanese workers is only starting to shift, and unspoken expectations of secrecy remain the norm. The government, which is dominated by conservatives, has mostly steered clear of the issue. Gay marriage has received no serious political debate. In 2016, at the urging of an activist group, the northern city of Sapporo began issuing partnership certificates to same-sex couples, a first for a Japanese city. The move followed the introduction of a similar system in the Shibuya route of Tokyo in 2015. Although the certificates carry no legal weight in Japan as marriage law is determined by the national government, the certificate does provide a degree of official sanction to the emerging equality movement and has brought some tangible benefits. Public housing authorities in Sapporo and Shibuya, for example, are required to recognize as spouses any tenants who have acquired the certificates. Internet activism also burgeoned. Whilst many of the public spheres and gathering spaces that once defined LGBT activism, bars, bookstores, and women's music festivals began to vanish, and the usage of queer replaced lesbian identification for many younger women activists. Unfortunately, while the attention shifted to global activism in the US, gains has not been matched by similar equal rights laws in the 75 other countries where homosexuality remains illegal. As of 2016, LGBT identification and activism was still punishable by death in 10 Muslim countries, include Iran, Iraq, Mauritania, Nigeria, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Sudan, Uganda, and Yemen. Increased tolerance of homosexuality. Globally, in recent years there has been a positivity in attitudes toward homosexuals and other members of the LGBT community. Except for South Korea, in the United States and Canada, the percentage of acceptance of homosexuality by society has grown by at least 10 percentage points since 2007. These are amongst the key findings of a new survey by the Pew Research Center conducted in 39 countries among 37,653 respondents from March 2nd to May 1st, 2013. The survey also found that acceptance of homosexuality is particularly widespread in countries where religion is less central in people's lives and amongst the richest countries in the world. One of the striking examples is Australia. Same-sex marriage has been on the political agenda in Australia for several years as part of the broader debate about the legal recognition of same-sex relationships. Australia inherited anti-gay laws from British settlers who arrived in late 1700s. Until 1949, the death penalty remained on the statute books for sodomy in the southern state of Victoria, but change did eventually come in 1975 when South Australia declared that male homosexuality would no longer be a crime. Finally, in November 2017, Australia voted to approve gay marriage after a majority of the population voted yes in a historical postal survey on same-sex unions. Close to 8 million people, representing 61.6% of the population, voted. The country is now the 24th in the world to allow same-sex couples to marry, according to Pew Research. By contrast, in poorer countries where religion and religious beliefs are more prevalent, few believe homosexuality should be accepted by society. A 2017 book by Professor Amy Adamczyk shows that these cross-national differences in acceptance can be explained by three factors: the strength of democratic institutions, the level of economic development, and the religious context of the places where people live. Age is also a factor in several countries. Younger respondents have more tolerant views than older respondents. And whilst gender differences are not prevalent, in those countries where they are, women are consistently more accepting of homosexuality than men. Another study echoed these findings of increased acceptance. The dichotomized variable of homosexuality, defined as either wrong or not wrong over the time period between 1973 and 1994, was analyzed. The intent of this new analysis is to follow up those trends and explore regional differences as they currently exist. The findings indicated an increased trend in the belief that homosexuality was not wrong. The percentage increased from a low of 19% in 1973 to 31% by 1994, and with the exception of the late 1980s, when AIDS deaths were at the peak in the United States, the trend has been in the direction of increasing tolerance of homosexuality over time. Data from the GSS were used again in a secondary analysis to determine correct trends. The GSS utilized probability sampling techniques and large sample sizes. The dataset also included the additional years of 1996 and 1998. In 1996 and 1998, the percentage of respondents stating homosexuality is not wrong rose to 33% and 34% respectively. According to the British Social Attitudes, the biggest survey of its kind, the transformation in attitudes to homosexuality ranks as the most dramatic change in British public opinion in a generation. For example, 25 years ago, almost two-thirds of the British public opposed same-sex relationships because they believed they were inherently morally wrong, and in the early 1980s, more than half of the population did not think it was acceptable for a gay or lesbian person to be a teacher, and more than 4 out of 10 people did not believe they should hold a respectable position in the public life. In contrast, the latest British Social Attitude Survey in 2013 showed that only 1 in 5 now disapproves of gay or lesbian relationships. The speed of change is all the more striking given that during the 1980s the number of people who objected to homosexuality was on the rise. In contrast, this latest survey found that 56% of those polled supported gay marriage, which is now on the statute book. What has caused the difference in attitude and acceptance? Jean Twenge, professor of psychology at San Diego State University and author of the book Generation Me, states that this change towards acceptance took place over generations, not just time, where a younger generation moved in to replace an older one and brought a new perspective to the forefront. She has asserted that the generational acceptance is in line with the most prominent cultural changes of the last few decades, akin with individualism. Plausibly, this has resulted in increased individual freedom and less group authority, as witnessed in less religious affiliation, the push for legal marijuana, tolerance for differences, and more open attitudes around sexuality. That can mean more self-focus, but it can also mean more tolerance towards others who are different. Although attitudes towards same-sex relationships have generally become more favorable, nevertheless, there remains a great deal to be accomplished in freeing many millions of gays and lesbians from the tyranny of fear and discovery, of actual and potential economic disenfranchisement, of the burden of ridicule, shame and scorn, and sanctions for alleged criminal behavior. Laws and government officials often provide a justification for this maltreatment. Amnesty International, 2001, reports rapes, beatings, and life imprisonment for alleged crimes against the order of nature in such countries as Uganda, Zimbabwe, Romania, Malaysia, the Caribbean, Russia, China, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. In fact, at least 78 countries criminalize same-gender relationships, and some countries punish offenders with flogging or the death penalty. Ken Livingstone, a left-wing London politician with a strong record on gay rights, had in the past welcomed Yusuf al-Qaddawi, an American-bashing Muslim cleric from Egypt who supports the death penalty for homosexuality. Trump abruptly announced a ban on transgender people serving in the military, ostensibly for the tremendous medical costs and disruption of transgender service members. The tragic fact remains that many LGB people have no count, and there is no legitimate way of protection which court or police offer. What's going on in Islamic countries? Whilst homosexuality has gained greater social acceptance in many Western societies, it remains highly stigmatized and in most cases forbidden in Islamic countries. The changing attitudes towards the LGBT community around the world have not been witnessed in the Middle East. It remains the most resistant to change. In many parts of the Middle East, even homosexuality as a topic of discussion is shunned, which makes it very difficult for LGBT advocacy groups to form and to effect change. In a larger-scale international study of global attitudes toward homosexuality conducted by the Pew Research Center, it was found that less than 5% of the people surveyed in Egypt, Indonesia, Jordan, Pakistan, the Palestinian territories, and Tunisia believed that society should accept homosexuality, compared to 80% of the Canadian and 76% of the Britons surveyed. The only Muslim-majority countries that expressed greater support were Malaysia, 9%, Turkey, 9%, and Lebanon, 18%, in which Islam arguably plays less central role in social and political life. Most Islamic countries prohibit homosexuality, and in many of these countries it is sanctioned by death. In Islamic societies, both judicial and extrajudicial measures taken against homosexuality communicate a clear message to society that homosexuality is wrong, immoral, and illegal, and thus punishable. The Islamic Republic of Iran, ruled by Sharia law, has a particularly high legal stance on homosexuality, including lashes and death penalty. Iranian law dictates that two unrelated men lying under the same bed cover will be punished with 60 lashes, that homosexual relation without anal penetration carries a penalty of 100 lashes, and that anal intercourse will be punished with death by hanging. According to Sharia law, individuals may be convicted of homosexuality only if they confess 4 times or if 4 righteous Muslim men testify they witnessed the homosexual act taking place. None of the Islamic countries can be said to offer social or legal environments that are supportive of LGBT, at least not at the present time. There is a lack of social community support mechanisms in place or affirmative Islamic organizations for the LGB that can provide the social and psychological comfort so desperately needed. Whilst the public display of ISIS persecution has attracted international attention over the past year, as in Syria, the situation was already precarious long before ISIS took over. Indeed, the situation began to rapidly deteriorate for Iraqi LGB community after the fall of Saddam Hussein in 2003. Islamist groups emerged from this political chaos and began targeting gay people, killing an estimated 200 LGBT people in 2012 alone. Today, these same groups have partnered with the Iraqi government in the fight against ISIS, giving them the freedom to continue persecuting sexual minorities. With the exception of confined local efforts, there are no signs of an amendment change to the social or legal standing of LGBT in Egypt. In Lebanon, the emergence of pro-LGBT organizations has been a crucial step in their fight for social and legal rights. Plausibly, this has led to a shift in attitudes towards some SGNs. This shift is interpreted as a product of sociopolitical factors that have been favorable to the introduction and emergence of new subjectivities in Lebanon. Although being LGB is prohibited and punishable in the majority of the Muslim countries, there are some exceptions flourishing. Only a handful of Islamic or Muslim-majority countries, e.g. Jordan, have legalized homosexuality, but even within these societies, there is little legal support for LGBT individuals and extrajudicial punishments may happen. The world's largest Muslim country, Indonesia, has a vibrant transgender culture and tradition which is broadly tolerated by the Indonesian public. Homosexuality and gay sex are not illegal in Indonesia. Paradoxically, transgender men and women are recognized and accepted in many Islamic cultures around the world. In fact, the idea of a man or woman identifying as a member of the opposite gender is more likely to be accepted than that of a man or woman expressing sexual desire for someone of their own gender. Not entirely hopeful, but there are some steps have been taken to facilitate the T of LGBT in Egypt and Iran. As early as 1988, gender reassignment surgery was declared acceptable under Islamic law by scholars at Egypt's Al-Azhar, the world's oldest Islamic university. In Iran, in 1987, Ayatollah Khomeini declared transgender surgical operations allowable. The basis for this attitude of acceptance is the belief that the person is born transgender but chooses to be homosexual, making homosexuality a sin. Nevertheless, many transgender Muslims after reassignment surgery still suffer from verbal and physical violence and social and cultural rejection in their own communities as they remain in their place of origin. Many are simply unable to flee or relocate to another country where they are unknown. Undoubtedly, it is also highly plausible that many opted for the surgery under pressure. See Chapter 3 for an in-depth discussion on the perils of transgender surgical operations. LGBT activism in Lebanon has allowed organizations like Helm, the Arab world's leading LGBT group, to provide legal and health services for LGBT. Helm is the Arabic acronym of Lebanese Protection for Lesbians, Gays, Bisexuals, and Transgender. Lebanon is considered to be the country most tolerant to alternative sexual lifestyles. Helm has enough acceptance and influence in Lebanon to regularly host events on LGBT issues and has even gone to the streets to protest violence against the LGBT community in Lebanon. Yet whilst Beirut is more liberal than its neighboring countries and cities, it is still far less tolerant than Western societies. Helm's services have arguably only succeeded in protecting a limited number of individuals, typically the more affluent members of society, whilst ignoring, and in some cases even harming those of marginalized and disadvantaged groups who either do not or cannot identify with the ideas promoted by LGBT organizations. Scholars such as Massad, for example, argue that it is foreign and foreign-funded organizations like ILGA and Helm, respectively, that are helping to create gay communities in Lebanon by promoting Western sexual etymologies and identity categories. This, according to the author, problematizes LGBT behavior and subsequently elicits further interventions to support those communities. This issue has garnered the attention of the Iraqi and Arabic media. For example, in Baghdad, Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr publicly advocated a humanitarian stance towards the LGBT community, saying they should not be subjected to violence. As clerics have the moral right to intervene in all states' affairs and in the minute details of people's social lives, it is noteworthy to mention that the clerics in Iraq are the most prominent and influential players in opinion formation by influencing and orienting public opinions. Sad's statement has generated controversy because it contrasts with the position of other clerics and religious institutions, namely other Shiite scholars in Iraq as well as in Iran. Whilst clerics in both states preach that Islam forbids homosexuality, the difference lies in the way to address it. The majority of the population in Iraq denounce homosexuality but do not support violence against homosexuals. In Iraq and Lebanon, punishment for homosexuality is not stipulated by the law. This is not the case for Iran, where the situation is starkly different. Iran's Sharia-based constitution holds homosexuality to be a crime punishable by death. Lesbians can be punished with 100 lashes on the Iranian law. A look to the future. Vital operation faced by LGBT persons vary considerably from country to country, with levels of violence, discrimination, and stigma reflecting the prevailing local contexts. At the same time, individual communities may have values, norms, customs, language, perceptions and approaches to development challenges that can be useful in understanding how best to approach LGBT issues. One major positive global trend emerging from the current discourse is that sexual diversity and orientation have gained significant visibility and international attention across the globe. The increasing visibility of LGBT identity movements and discourses has led to a proliferation of international human rights organizations that have become attuned to documenting and addressing violence based on sexual orientation and gender identity across the world. The internet and social media outlets have provided forums for positive information about LGBT identities. The internet has also created an enabling environment propelling legislative protection for the rights of sexual minorities, at least on paper. In countries where being ostracized and labeled as a non-heterosexual is dangerous, people are reaching out to other LGBTs via the internet. Whilst often a tool of the privileged, it does nevertheless provide channel for exchange and solidarity. The interactive nature of the internet creates spaces through which communities are formed and communication and discussions occur. The online and offline worlds afford opportunities for individuals to socialize, provide support, build movements, and engage in information-sharing techniques of survival. In Iran's case, the Iranian government blocks websites that it deems politically, religiously, or morally dangerous. Many people in Iran do, however, have access to anti-filtration software that allows them to circumvent the censorship. A narrow conception of Asian values is promoted by some Asia-specific governments in order to marginalize LGBT communities. That emphasizes homogeneous rather than diverse societies where the only acceptable norm is heterosexuality. More generally, Muslim states have consistently opposed the notion of sexual orientation as having no legal foundation in international law and being contrary to Islamic teachings. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation has been the central forum through which objections have been coordinated. In Iran, LGB individuals are consistently subjected to harassment. The laws are rigid and strict against them. They are vulnerable to harassment, abuse and violence from their families and society. One glimmer of hope comes from recent films, documentaries, music, and other art focused on LGB Iranians, offering a new perspective that may change attitudes. For example, the 2011 Iranian movie Facing Mirrors, Ayne Ruberu, shows the possibility of gradual attitude transformation towards sexual minorities by religious people. It tells us the story of Eddie, a young transgender man, as he struggles to escape a family who are forcing him into a marriage in order that they may maintain their family honor. In the film, a traditional religious woman initially shows a strong aversion and repulsion towards the transgender woman. Later, by observing the transgender woman suffering as she experiences violence by her father, the religious woman eventually comes to the conclusion that inflicting such pain and suffering on others is the embodiment of evil in a religious sense. Facing Mirrors does not claim to have found a solution to this problem, but it does try to take on a humanistic look at this dark corner of society in a dramatic way in order to support the idea that denying or ignoring these people is not the answer. In comparison to Iran, in recent years, South Africa and Ecuador became the first countries to expand the basis for discrimination to include sexual orientation and to incorporate anti-discrimination provisions in their constitutions. However ambivalent one might feel about the inclusion of LGBT personnel in the military or the struggle for gay marriages, several countries now recognize same-sex couples' civil partnerships. For instance, Europe was home to the 3 countries that adopted marriage equality in 2014. In Luxembourg, Parliament overwhelmingly voted to approve marriage and adoption by same-sex couples, and Finland's Parliament voted to allow same-sex marriage. In the United Kingdom, regional Scottish legislators voted overwhelmingly to join England and Wales in legalizing marriage equality. In 2015, Ireland became the first country to endorse marriage equality by popular referendum, and at 62%, the vote was not even close. That same year, Ireland passed the Gender Recognition Bill legislation that made it only the 5th country in the world to allow trans people to change their legal gender markers based solely on the truth in their hearts rather than required medical interventions. Although these countries are overwhelmingly Western, activists in Vietnam and Mexico are lobbying for similar changes. Activists were also successful in their efforts to broaden the human rights agenda so that it began to incorporate various violations faced by LGBT individuals. Since 1991, mainstream human rights organizations have taken note of LGBT persecutions and harassments. For example, Amnesty International's mandate includes the protection of individuals persecuted on the grounds of their sexual orientation. Created in 1978, Human Rights Watch, an international non-government organization that conducts research and advocacy on human rights, now has a dynamic LGBT program. Recently, LGBT individuals located in predominantly Muslim contexts have begun organizing. Speaking out publicly on a social forum is a means for LGBT individuals to tell their own stories. This naturally takes a bit longer, particularly for those individuals who live within politically homophobic and socially repressed societies. Sometimes, it is blatant discrimination that triggers resistance. However, the strategy of reclaiming public space requires not only seasoned risk assignment, but also courage that strengthens over time. For example, Lambada Istanbul, although active since 1993, organized its first Pride March in the Turkish capital a decade later, and at that time, only 50 pioneers dared to join. Exposing LGBT visibility often carries a steep price of a high level of mental trauma and physical torture. Lesbian activism is even more of a challenge, but some are paving the way, such as newcomer Aswat in Palestine. An organization composed of lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex, questioning, and queer Palestinian women who come together in 2002. Aswat, established a home for Palestinian LGBTQI women to allow safe, supportive, and empowering spaces to express and address personal, social, and political struggles as a national indigenous minority living inside Israel, women in a patriarchal society, and as LGBTQI women in a wider heteronormative culture. Despite the risks, support groups are now sprouting, although some still cannot operate openly. Over the last few years, Muslim LGBTI people are coalescing in places as diverse as Morocco, Indonesia, Turkey, Malaysia, Jordan, Lebanon, Jerusalem, South Africa, Nigeria, Palestine, Dubai, and Saudi Arabia, as well as in countries with large indigenous Muslim communities such as India. Interestingly, the most repressive regimes are not necessarily the worst as far as expression of gender identity is concerned. Transsexuals in Jordan and in Iran seem to be able to turn the strict gender binary division of society to their own advantage, with some individuals actually getting support, including financial support, from fundamentalist clerics for sex change operations. Unfortunately, there is always very real pressure to undergo sex reassignment procedures and subpar medical treatment associated with such procedures. Although the international LGBT community is slowly gaining official recognition from governments and societies, in the Middle East, the situation for LGBT community remains stagnant and dismal. Across the Middle East, the LGBT community faces varying degrees of repression both because of laws directed against its members and the wider social stigma. With the exception of Israel, most Middle Eastern countries openly condemn the LGBT community. Consequently, the LGBT community in the Middle East exists on the ground, and members of its community often live in fear of being discovered. Barring a few exceptions, the outlook for LGBT individuals in the Middle East is bleak, or even outright deadly. Many LGBT individuals face major struggles just in their quotidian lives, and many of their struggles are social in origin, such as being bullied in school or disowned, beaten or raped by family members, or feeling compelled to run away from home. A phenomenon known in most parts of the world, including the United States. These abuses are often not reported to the authorities due to the threat of additional violence from officials themselves. Security officers often raid the parties and other gatherings of LGBT Iranians, sometimes leading to arrests and detainments. The Kurds stand apart from their fellow Muslim majority neighbors because of their progress in women's equality, boasting the only all-female units taking on ISIS. But it is too soon to say whether or not the Kurdish jurisdictions could someday translate into a haven of relative sanctuary for LGBT people. Nevertheless, the waves of change could be felt in Islamic world in 2015. The leading Kurdish party in Turkey had its first ever openly gay candidate for Turkish parliament. Mr. Sulu has campaigned on a message of equal rights for gay rights in Turkey for 17 years and stands on a platform of promoting LGBT rights. Still, even amongst some relatively secular families, the tribal underpinnings of Kurdish culture, which are more pronounced in rural areas, can strongly limit social behavior. Tribes still retain and adhere to their own conservative honor code, even if religion is one of the many driving forces behind the lack of tolerance. In Iran, the new Islamic Code of Criminal Procedure ratified by the Guardian Council in 2013 with a 5-year probation period has been waiting to go into effect since October 2014. According to the document referenced at the preamble, the new Code of Criminal Procedure has been updated in accordance with the state's policy to Islamize the legal system in Iran. Nevertheless, the new Iranian Code of Criminal Procedure includes amendments which offer better protection for individuals charged with homosexual conduct. According to the Iranian Penal Code, there are serious risks of being sanctioned to capital punishment for those charged with same-sex relations. Because of this, lawyers and defendants must be informed of these revisions and the potential opportunities provided in the new Code of Criminal Procedures to protect LGBT individuals from being detained or convicted of same-sex crimes. Since ISIS has come to prominence, it has set about persecuting religious minorities, women and others whose identities and lifestyles are anathema to its puritanical creed. The various degrees of brutality, ostentatious isolation, and targeted deliberate social stigma is quite already deliberating. But under the so-called Islamic State, things took a devastating turn. In areas under Islamic State control, its fighters have issued edicts against homosexual behavior and flashy hairstyles and promised death for anyone caught in the act of sodomy. In a single day in September, the Islamic State killed 9 men for homosexual acts and a 15-year-old boy in a Syrian town who had been accused of sodomy. ISIS-appointed courts have declared gay sex a capital offense and have sentenced brutal punishments in line with an extremist reading of Sharia. This is but one case of how ISIS exploits pre-existing religious and social biases against gay people amongst the populace under its control in order to justify their persecution, a practice that has reportedly continued into 2017 despite territorial losses. The litanies of punishments are cruel, barbaric, and defy comprehension. One of the most common punishments has been to throw individuals off of buildings. Those who survive the fall are then stoned to death by waiting crowds, which also include children. In July 2015, 2 men suffered the same fate in the Syrian city of Palmyra, then controlled by the Islamic State. They were shoved off the roof of a hotel after an Islamic State official ruled that they must be executed for being homosexual. In January 2017, ISIS executed a 17-year-old boy in Mosul, Iraq, by throwing him off of a building. Another unidentified young man was thrown off a Mosul roof in March. The waiting crowd below reportedly stoned the man until he died. Fueling fear, ISIS has publicized images of both murders through affiliated accounts on social media. In January 2015, a media wing of the extremist group released images that appeared to show fighters pushing men accused of homosexuality off a building in the Iraqi city of Mosul. Over the long term, there are tiny seeds of change. In 2002, Iraqi Kurdistan replaced Saddam Hussein-era laws which had severely limited the ability of authorities to persecute those conducting honor violence. By 2007, Iraqi Kurdish Prime Minister Netrivan Barzani launched the special commissions with special purpose law enforcement to combat and track honor violence against women and banned village elders from deciding legal cases outside of the court system. This is indeed a first step towards combating the human rights violations on many grounds, including LGBT. Over the recent years, the Kurdistan Regional Government, the autonomous authority in Iraq's northernmost provinces, appears to have quietly shifted from ignoring police who punish gays to taking a more hands-off approach. In comparison, Israel is the most progressive country in the Middle East in terms of safeguarding LGBT rights. LGBT rights are formally recognized, and members of the LGBT community may obtain a civil union with rights that are almost in par with heterosexual couples. Other countries or areas worth mentioning include Iraq, Jordan, and Palestine, where having sexual intercourse with a same-sex partner is not considered illegal. In Lebanon, despite the fact that homosexuality remains illegal, the country's escalating LGBT community is becoming more visible. Particularly in Beirut, LGBT people have established a healthy, albeit underground, community. Conclusion. This research study is an attempt to enable researchers and activists to reflect upon and ponder over the modes of survival in which LGBT lives can be improved in Iran. The main challenge of LGB in Iran is eradicating societal negative view that staunchly advocates intolerance, discrimination, and persecution. This negative view becomes even more acute as Iranian laws and regulations approve and reinforce the unflinching unacceptance of LGBT's existence. Raising awareness and fighting hate is the primordial goal of NGOs' social activists. The initiation of LGBT campaigns in Iranian society and having a more active presence on social media and platforms enhances positive public perception on LGBT people. The multitude of issues, as outlined earlier, need to be taken into account. Equally, the challenges associated with their lives, the problematic issues of definition and categorization, and the language used to describe LGBT people need to be addressed. Despite the odds against them, even in the harshest of Middle Eastern countries, there exist underground LGBT gatherings that continue to flourish notwithstanding local popular opinion, cultural norms, and religious institutions that continue to denigrate and discourage Middle Eastern LGBT communities from asserting their rights. As we come upon the 21st century, the growing pressure for inclusion of LGBT rights in the Middle East from external sources, e.g., international human rights groups, foreign governments, expatriates, and the international LGBT community is a reckoning force. The rising chorus of international condemnation on the treatment of LGBT community in the Middle East can no longer be shoved aside. What is readily apparent, especially for a group that has been and continues to be stigmatized, are the broad societal mechanisms that play a key role in understanding the differences in levels of perceived discrimination across countries. This research study surmised that social acceptance is such a crucial element that many studies have sought to understand the role of social acceptance. Understanding this phenomenon immediately becomes relevant to explain the levels of perceived discrimination amongst LGB individuals. Future studies of social acceptance would thus do well to further expand its scope and impact. On a final note, this research study demonstrates the acute need for further methodological and theoretical undertakings to propel change and induce an understanding on such an important societal issue. As the research study highlights, LGB individuals chronically face much stigma and discrimination, which crucially impacts both their physical and mental health. Learning how to reduce this stigma and discrimination are key elements in improving the lives of LGB individuals. This research study demonstrates the importance of addressing social acceptance of homosexuality and the value of a more theory-driven, cross-national approach to explain the different levels of perceived discrimination across countries. However, meaningful action can only happen within a favorable environment with open-minded policymakers, politicians, and the political elite. This includes alteration of traditional ideology and rigid norms. In Iran, where homosexuality is still criminalized and sanctioned by death, projects to support the social and economic inclusion of sexual minorities are either impossible to implement or unlikely to make a difference. By emphasizing that LGB exclusion affects everyone, we can hopefully help countries to realize that putting an end to discrimination will reap a wide range of benefits. Research demonstrates that the excluding LGB communities is a leading cause of poverty and a hurdle in development. LGB exclusion is very much a developmental issue, not only due to its residual consequences on individuals' lives and impoverishes levels of an entire group, but also due to its adverse impact on economics and societies at large. Achieving inclusive development will require increasing the integration of LGBT issues in processes, policies, and programming where windows of opportunity arise which can capitalize on lessons learned from prior work in this area, beginning with economic and health sector. Over 31% of Iran's 80 million populations are between 15 to 29 years old, and this very young demographic profile represents an opportunity for change, a new political dynamic, and potentially a new version on sexuality. Moving this generational vision forward will require compelling and shocking knowledge and formulating a learning agenda counted on LGB inclusion in all walks of life. Progress in addressing the key needs of the LGB community in Iran will be accelerated by closing information gaps, by tapping into existing data and gathering more robust baseline data, by supporting research, testing new and innovative ideas, and by subjecting programming to rigorous evolution. When the results of these efforts are shared in an open and transparent manner, the growing community of practice engaged in this work will be able to build on up-to-date successes and avoid repeating mistakes or missteps. However, this is worthwhile to mention here that the society has strict reservations against the LGB population and community at large opposed to people with other than heterosexuals. Therefore, the government in the Middle East generally, and in Iran particularly, doesn't need to do anything. The pressure of denying and opposing has taken by the society, several organizations, and family institutes, which has made the government burden-free and indifferent. This is quite evident from the movements across Middle East that people has lack of tolerance when it comes to supporting LGB individuals. In that scenario, government bodies enjoy a laid-back position. The changing landscape and worldwide recognition of LGBT rights, is demanding a change. This is the end of the audiobook, The Forbidden Tale, by the author Kamil Ahmadi. Read to you by Sina Barami.